The partnership between Henry Ford and the Dodge brothers made everyone rich, but honestly, it was never built to last. Ford wanted the brothers out, and John and Horace were getting tired of dealing with his ego and stubborn attitude. For years, they gave Ford solid advice about how to make his cars better, even the famous Model T. But Ford just ignored them. He told them to leave his designs alone and stick to making parts, which drove the brothers nuts. Sure, they were making a fortune without much risk, but the Dodges knew leaning on Ford couldn't last forever. In 1913, John Dodge finally had enough. He quit as Ford's vice president and summed it up perfectly. "I'm tired of being carried around in Henry Ford's vest pocket." After that, the brothers got to work on a bold plan to go out on their own. 18 months later, on July 1, 1914, they launched the Dodge Brothers Motor Company. Horace and John already had a reputation as Michigan's best mechanics. Their names meant quality. So when they rolled out their first car, the Model 30, people paid attention. Over 6,000 showed up just to see it launch. The Model 30 came with a 35 horsepower, 4-cylinder engine, which was 15 horsepower more than Ford's Model T. But it wasn't just about the engine. The car was a leap forward for its time, the first with an all-metal body, plus an electric starter, headlights, a 12-volt electrical system, and a speedometer, features you couldn't get in a Model T. By 1915, they'd sold over 45,000 cars, making Dodge the third best-selling automaker in the country in their very first year. Like Ford, the brothers didn't bother with yearly model upgrades. Instead, they kept tweaking the mechanics and started rolling out more options: touring cars, sedans, roadsters, trucks, taxis. They pushed deeper into trucks too, like the Dodge panel van. People sometimes balked at the higher price tag compared to the Model T. Horace just shrugged and said, "Just think of all those Ford owners who will someday want an automobile." The rivalry with Ford was on. Dodge sales shot up, 72,000 vehicles in 1916, over 100,000 in 1917. Ford hated watching the Dodges succeed, especially since they still owned 10% of his company and used the dividends to bankroll their own business. In other words, Ford was funding his own competition. He couldn't stand it. So he stopped paying dividends and poured the money into building the massive River Rouge plant. He also doubled worker pay to $5 a day and slashed Model T prices, all to grow his own company and squeeze the profits of his shareholders, mainly the Dodge brothers. Canada wasn't just about machines for them. That's where they first got a taste of the transportation business. Horace came up with his 4-point bicycle ball bearing. Pretty smart, honestly. His design kept the dust out and made bikes run smoother. The thing caught on, and before long, the brothers joined forces with Fred Evans, one of their managers. By 1897, the three of them launched the Evans and Dodge Bicycle Company. Thanks to that patented bearing, their bikes started flying off the shelves. Fred was a born salesman, hauling their bikes to exhibitions and cycle shows all over the U.S. Not many Canadian bike companies could pull that off. Success hit fast. By early 1898, they were already making plans to expand into London, Ontario, and Montreal. But suddenly, everyone was making bikes. Competition was everywhere. The brothers still made good money selling their bearings, but they saw where things were headed. Time for something new. They sold their shares for $7,500, headed back to Detroit, and opened their own machine shop in 1900. They called it Dodge Brothers. They had no clue this move would flip the American car industry and, honestly, the world upside down. When they got started, John was almost 36 and Horace was 32. They brought in the best equipment they could find, hired about a dozen skilled workers, and started fixing and building anything people needed: farm tools, stoves, typesetting machines, stationary engines, whatever. It didn't take long for word to get around. Folks from all over Michigan started showing up. A Detroit newspaper called their shop the most up-to-date place in town. Things looked good, but business wasn't always easy. Most of their customers were small companies, and a lot of them paid late, if at all. That changed when Ransom Eli Olds walked in. Olds was one of the first to set up an automobile factory in Detroit, and he was thinking big. In 1901, he invented the assembly line, which let him build cars faster and cheaper. He heard about the Dodge brothers' reputation and hired them to make engines and transmissions for his Model R curved dash. That car was light, reliable, and honestly pretty powerful for its time. The Dodge brothers delivered. Their parts were solid, and the curved dash took off, selling hundreds in its first year and becoming America's first gasoline car success story. By 1902, Olds was cranking out 2,500 cars a year. That win let the Dodges move their shop to a bigger spot and earned them a real name in the car business. Their partnership with Olds Motor Works, soon just called Oldsmobile, made them rich and gave them a reputation for quality and reliability. But it wasn't just about being great with machines. The brothers put in the work, managed things smartly, and brought everything they'd picked up in Canada and earlier jobs along for the ride. The Dodge name quickly became a mark of trust. Then came a big turning point: meeting Henry Ford. That partnership would change everything, not just for them, but for the entire auto industry. Back in 1902, Henry Ford was 39. The partnership between Henry Ford and the Dodge brothers made them all rich, but it was never meant to last. Ford wanted the brothers out, and honestly, John and Horace were sick of dealing with Ford's ego and stubborn attitude. For years, they tried giving him advice on how to improve his cars, including the famous Model T. But Ford just ignored them. He told them to stick to building parts and leave the designs alone, and that really got under their skin. Sure, the brothers were making millions with Ford, and life was comfortable, but deep down they knew it wasn't smart to rely on him forever. So in 1913, John Dodge finally had enough and quit as vice president. He told people, "I'm tired of being carried around in Henry Ford's vest pocket." After that, the brothers got to work on their own plan, overhauling their business in just a year and a half. By July 1, 1914, they launched the Dodge Brothers Motor Company. John and Horace already had a reputation as the best mechanics in Michigan. Their name meant quality. No wonder over 6,000 people showed up to see the first Dodge car, the Model 30. The car itself was impressive. A 35 horsepower, 4-cylinder engine, which was 15 more horsepower than Ford's Model T. But horsepower wasn't the only thing that set it apart. The Model 30 was the first car with an all-metal body. It had an electric starter, headlights, a 12-volt electrical system, and a speedometer, things you just didn't get with a Model T. In their very first full year, 1915, the Dodge brothers built and sold more than 45,000 cars, making them the third best-selling automaker in America. Instead of rolling out new models every year like some companies, they focused on improving the mechanics and expanding their lineup. Touring cars, sedans, roadsters, trucks, and taxis. Trucks became a big deal for them, and they even developed the Dodge panel van. People sometimes wondered why Dodges cost more than the Model T. Horace had a simple answer. Just think of all those Ford owners who will someday want an automobile. The rivalry between Dodge and Ford was on. By 1916, Dodge was up to 72,000 vehicles sold and more than 100,000 in 1917. Ford wasn't happy. The Dodge brothers still owned 10% of Ford Motor Company, and they used the dividends from those shares to fund their new business. So Ford was basically paying his competitors, and he hated it. He stopped paying dividends and instead poured that money into building the massive River Rouge plant. He also raised his workers' wages to $5 a day and slashed Model T prices, all to try to crush the Dodge brothers' profits and keep his own company on top. The Dodge brothers had enough of Ford and took him to court. After 3 years of legal headaches, they finally won. Henry Ford had to cough up over $2 million in back dividends and start paying them quarterly again. Ford hated this setup. So in 1919, he decided to just buy them out, every single share. The price? A jaw-dropping $25 million. That deal, plus the dividends they'd collected over the years, meant John and Horace turned their original $10,000 into a staggering $32 million. Not bad at all. Meanwhile, their own car company was booming. The Dodge brothers' cars were so reliable and well-liked, they didn't even need much advertising. They kept things simple with slogans like, "It speaks for itself," or just dependability, a word they actually made up. Their reputation for toughness spread fast. In 1916, a U.S. Army lieutenant even used Dodge cars to chase down bandits in Mexico during the campaign against Pancho Villa, making Dodge the first vehicles the Army ever used in the field. That kicked open new doors. Soon Dodge landed contracts to supply military vehicles, truck chassis, and ambulances for the U.S. Army during World War I. Even the French reached out, asking the brothers for help building recoil systems for their artillery. These military deals made up for lost foreign sales during the war, but even more, they cemented Dodge's reputation for building tough cars, a reputation that stuck ever since. By 1920, Dodge was the second biggest car company in America, right behind Ford, delivering over 145,000 vehicles in 1 year. But just when it looked like the best was yet to come, disaster hit. On January 2nd, 1920, John and Horace left Detroit for the National Automobile Show in New York. When they got back a week later, both were sick with the flu, and it quickly turned into pneumonia. Horace fell ill first, and John stayed by his brother's side, barely leaving his bedside. But then John got sick too, and suddenly both were bedridden. Horace started to improve, but John kept getting worse. He died just 10 days later, leaving everyone devastated. Horace eventually recovered, but losing his brother hit him hard. The passing of my dear brother is to me a loss so great that I hesitate to look forward to the years ahead without his companionship, he said. Horace tried to keep running the business, but his own health started to slip. By August, he couldn't lead the company anymore and retreated to his mansion in Palm Beach to try to recover. He never did. On December 10, 1920, Horace died of cirrhosis of the liver, just 11 months after John. After the Dodge brothers died, their widows took over and handed the reins to Frederick J. Haynes. Honestly, Haynes was the right guy for the job. He'd been with the Dodges from the start and knew exactly what they wanted for the company. Under his watch, Dodge rolled out a bunch of new models and teamed up with the Graham brothers to make heavy-duty trucks, which gave sales a real boost. But Haynes didn't get to stick around for long. In 1925, the widows sold Dodge to an investment bank for $146 million in cash, and Haynes was out the door the moment the papers were signed. Here's where things went south. The new owners had no clue about the car business. Sales nosedived. By 1927, they were down almost 40%, and Dodge had dropped to 13th place in the U.S. auto market. The bank didn't last long as owners. They put Dodge back up for sale, and that's when Walter P. Chrysler swooped in, buying the company for $170 million in 1928. Chrysler gave the company a new direction, trimmed the name down to just Dodge, and started focusing on affordable cars to compete with Ford and Chevy. It worked. Over the years, Dodge built a reputation for bold, powerful cars, think Challenger and Charger, and carved out a big spot in the truck world too with the Ram lineup. That's the story of Dodge and its founders, John and Horace, two tough brothers from Niles, Michigan. They helped build the American car industry from the ground up and died young, right at the height of their success. Today, most people only know their name from the badge on a car, not the men themselves. But their story still teaches a few things. First, respect your partners. The Dodges and Ford did great together when they played to each other's strengths, but things fell apart when egos got in the way. Second, know your finances. The Dodges weren't just good with engines, they were smart with money. They swapped debt for equity, used dividends for growth, and when Ford tried to edge them out, they fought back in court. That lawsuit, Dodge v. Ford, still gets talked about in business schools everywhere. Third, legacy is fragile. The Dodge brothers built an empire with grit and talent, survived setbacks that would crush most people, but in the end, a virus and heartbreak took them down. After that, the suits and banks moved in, and the company became just another name on a balance sheet. Their name lives on, sure, stamped on millions of cars. But the real Dodge brothers, the scrappy kids who tangled with Henry Ford and won, are almost forgotten, their story fading behind the industry they helped create. If anything, they remind us to build something that lasts, because you might not get to protect it yourself. It's a story a lot like Louis Chevrolet's. He started Chevrolet Motors, but died with nothing, barely remembered. Want to hear about him? Click the video on screen. If you like this look into financial history, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to Investor Voice, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next episode. I'm Michael. Thanks for watching. Share this with someone who loves cars, history, or a good underdog story. Take care and keep your eyes and your investments sharp. See you next time.